Okay, this one is really insane. I had this archive for a couple of months now, and I think the original account is long gone, so this will be a short one. It's titled, "I beat and sodomized the man who me as a child." He posted this in our confessions. The post reads, "I'm only confessing this because I did this 20 years ago, so the statute of limitations is up in my state for all of the crimes I committed. When I was a kid, I joined the Boy Scouts and my troop leader took advantage of me multiple times. As an adult, I met him in a bar and he seemingly didn't recognize me, but he was very flirty with me. I of course recognized him and played along with it. He invited me to his house and I agreed. I of course recognized him and played along with it. He drove me there and was all handsy and excited. So was I, but not the way he thought. I was planning on taking his life. The moment we got inside his house and went to the bedroom and took our clothes off, I started beating him. He was an old man and much weaker than me. He was screaming and begging me to stop, but I kept going. He had a baseball bat on the wall. And OP used it in a way which I cannot describe here on YouTube, but you can most likely guess what he used it for. Just think back to the title of this post. I honestly cannot show the rest of this post, but he basically kept on going and told him who he was and what the man did to him when he was younger. While he initially wanted to end him, he couldn't do it and instead beat him unconscious. Now we can jump back to the post as it continues with, "I left him there on the bed, got dressed and left. I'm not entirely sure of what happened after that, but as far as I can tell, he never told a soul about what I did to him. I stalked him for a while to make sure he wasn't coming after me, but I saw him during and after his recovery, and he barely could even walk. I did a real number on his ass and his legs with a bat, and he seemingly never recovered. He died last month and I just heard about it. I had tried to push everything out of my memory that he did to me and I did to him, but it's all flooding back. I don't regret what I did to him. I don't feel sorry. Obviously this could be some made up stuff by some edgelord, so take it with a grain of salt. As far as I can remember, this was a throwaway account, so it didn't have an extensive post history." This is one of the most recent posts in this video. It was shared by someone who goes by Player510. I'll have to change quite a bit because of the spelling and grammar. Their post reads, "Met a girl on a dating app. Had a nice time, but second date was almost my fate. 1 year ago I was on a dating app, a local app where you could talk to people who were within your area. I met a nice girl there and we also had common interests. We hit it off right away and exchanged numbers and pictures. Everything was perfect, a bit too perfect. She was all over me, saying stuff like you're a gentleman, but that's just for the ladies who read this post. But she was obsessed with me, and I never had a girl like that before. Even though she wasn't the best looking girl, she made me feel a certain type of way. Then, at some point, we met on a Saturday afternoon and had a nice time. I then went to her place. There, I wanted to stay overnight, but she didn't let me. I thought maybe she lost interest because of my poor performance. But I couldn't be bothered at that point and went on with my day and left the house. But no, she didn't lose interest. She asked me if I arrived well after I got home 30 minutes later. We just texted back and forth and that's it. Until 2 weeks later when I was done with my studies. I wanted to see her again, but something was different. The way she wrote, without emojis and more direct. She almost instantly replied, which is kinda different because she always took her time. That's at least how I knew her, but I was horny and didn't care that much, but it was almost like another person is behind her phone. I said I'll pick her up with my car at her house, but she insisted we should meet at her local park instead. I was confused and asked her why there, and she told me to not ask any dumb questions, and said just be there on time, and I complied. When I was there and was waiting for her, she came 10 minutes later, but I didn't care to be honest. I just was so happy I could see her again. She parked her car and I got a weird feeling. I checked the location, was looking left and right if there's something wrong, also checked the bushes to avoid a possible ambush. She also didn't come out for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and I was convinced it's one of her stupid and funny jokes she sometimes did earlier. I couldn't see her inside her car because the windows were darkened. I stood 20 to 30 meters away. I was waiting for her to come out of her car, but she didn't. I was even smiling at her car, probably because of nervousness, and thought she was playing a joke on me. But then suddenly I get a call. I pull out my phone and it was her. As soon as I pulled my phone and saw her name, I heard doors open. But not one door, but 2 or even more. The way the car was parked was horizontal, so I couldn't see if there were more passengers who opened the door. But one thing I knew was my body was instantly in fight or flight mode, and I knew something was very wrong here. I ran for my life and didn't even look back who or what exited the car. After I managed to escape, I deleted and blocked her number. I believe to this day, she cheated on her boyfriend and he somehow found out and wanted to beat me up or do even more serious harm. Heard about all of it in the news about how people lash out because of a cheating fiance or wife and didn't wanna be another victim. I don't even believe she was in the car, probably 2+ dudes, who intended to do serious harm on me. I was kinda surprised how fast I can run when I actually try to. Perhaps because of the adrenaline. My god, what a feeling that was. Honestly, the way this post is written is very authentic to me, so I had to take it in. But his explanation is also very interesting. He thinks she cheated on her boyfriend, but this could have been way more sinister. When I was reading the post, I thought it's a woman who is luring men by sleeping with them, and then on the next date, they get kidnapped and trafficked. At the same time, you could argue that they already had the chance to traffic him when he was vulnerable and at her house, but that may have been too suspicious, so no idea. I think both are possible explanations, but fortunately nothing happened to him. He also replied to a bunch of comments, so it adds to this being authentic. In this one, OP describes her experience with a very dangerous stalker. It reads, "Stalker believes I belong to him, and is threatening to take the life of my family. His arrest only made him more aggressive. Please help us." It's hard to make this coherent and safe for me, but I'll try my best. I'm in desperate need of advice and guidance. I have to be really careful not to tip this person off, so please just ask questions if I come across as too vague. I'm a stalking victim of a mentally sick person. I met them 18 years ago, in a sort of teaching situation, and had minimal contact with them within the program. They weren't sick at the time, just a regular student. I was close in age to the students, so I was very adamant about boundaries to maintain professionalism. Thus I didn't hear from any of them for 13 years. Then, 5 years ago, the student reached out, but in an alarming way. I tried to be polite, but they frightened me, so I asked them to not contact me again. I wasn't ever close to the student, so I didn't know why they were even reaching out. For 3 years, this person became increasingly aggressive, threatening and stalkerish. Declared me as his property, that he was going to rescue me, and that I had to return to him. If I didn't, he would take my life. I reported him, but the police weren't very helpful with my reports. He couldn't find me in person, so he reached out over various electronic and phone methods, always finding different ways to contact me. I stopped using social media. I stopped going out as much, stopped answering my phone, and yet it kept escalating. Eventually, I had enough, and petitioned my rights with the law. I had mountains of evidence, to the point where multiple judges stated outright shock and alarm. He was arrested, charged, jailed for several months, and an official protective order was issued. He refused mental health evaluation and help. He was arrested a couple times again for minor violations of the order, but nothing serious enough for jail time. Well, he's been out for a couple of years, and over the past few months has begun obsessing over me again. While he isn't contacting me directly, he's posting about me over numerous social media and online platforms. My name, my picture, lots of defaming lies about our quote-unquote relationship. Though the most concerning thing is, his threats have become much more pronounced, violent and frequent. He stated that he's going to take the life of anyone around me, including my siblings, my neighbors, and even the members of the church I used to attend. Basically anyone who talks to me. He despises me and wants me to suffer, and then return to him. I've called various resources for advice on what to do, and to them, it's pretty cut and dry. His current behavior violates a protective order and he'll be arrested. But then what? So he's out again in a few months, even more angry at me and agitated. He 100% blames me for his original arrest, jailing. He sees no connection between his behavior and threats and why he was jailed. He's very sick, and he even testified that I bribed the judge and police and have them under my control. So if I have him charged for violating the order on me, I am fairly confident that he'll try to take my life upon release, or that of my family. I've been considering approaching the situation on the side of the mass threats and less with the focus on me. For one, he thinks I'm a part of a specific religion, so I'm worried he'll try to harm its members. He's convinced that my family is part of this religion too, so he's described my family members from that point, and part of the reason for why they deserve to die. With those aspects in mind, could this be a case that the FBI could handle? Is there any way to approach it as a general threat to multiple people without making me the face of the case? I desperately wish to avoid returning to court, as I'm certain that it would only reinforce his behavior. What can I do? How can I make this about his threats and less about my protection order? Please help me. I'm scared for myself and for my family. Wow, it never fails to surprise me how horrible and gruesome people can be. Generally speaking, I understand her approach. She thinks it would trigger the perpetrator more if she'd report him to the police, but at the same time, it also somewhat reinforces his behavior, since there is no consequence for it. Yes, he was arrested for a couple of months, but that clearly wasn't enough. The judge might consider jailing him for a longer period of time, possibly up to a few years. He might also be forced to seek therapy, because prior he was allowed to refuse it. Issue is, and this is what OP already mentioned, she fears that regardless of how long he keeps being jailed, that once he's out, he will seek revenge. I thought about other things she might be able to do, like moving to a different state or a country, but the problem is that this is not only about her, but also people in her environment also being in danger. My other idea was to actually consult everyone that was threatened, and to file a class action lawsuit, but I actually have no idea if that's something that could be done in the US. It's a very tough situation. I'm very interested in your thoughts and ideas. How would you try to handle this perpetrator? Let me know in the comments. This following topic dates back 2 years ago, but there have been multiple updates on this, with the latest being just a few months ago. It's very elaborate, but I found it very interesting. A user that goes by "Dad Might Not Be a Murder" has started discussions about their dad in a few subreddits, but it gained the most traction on RBI. It's a very long read, so just please bear with me, and I'll also summarize the update post so this doesn't turn into me reading out stuff for half an hour. It reads, "Bear with me as I recount this to the best of my ability. I have to remain somewhat vague in some of the details in order to protect my anonymity. However, I'll do my best to be as clear as possible about the series of events. In September of 2015, my dad's girlfriend, Sherry, started an affair with one of his friends named Billy. Billy and my dad had been friends since high school, and I knew him well. He was nerdy and kind of weird, but he was nice enough. My dad, not surprisingly, was pretty upset about the affair, but he and Sherry were already having relationship issues, and I think he was happy to find a reason to officially leave her. I knew that he had a few relatively cordial run-ins with Sherry and Billy, as they all lived in the same town, but he had mostly cut them both off entirely. During this time, Sherry moved to a new house, only a few streets from my dad. By Thanksgiving of 2015, my dad was roughing it a little. I think he was still kind of bummed about the affair, but he had recently been in a car accident, resulting in him losing his job due to a back injury, so he was having some money issues pending a lawsuit settlement he was waiting on. At the beginning of December at 8 AM, my dad called me at work. We only spoke for about 10 minutes, but he was in a great mood. We had some laughs and made some plans to hang out for the weekend. He mentioned very briefly that Sherry had called him about an hour earlier, but he ignored the call. I barely even remember him saying it. I got home from work that night and my phone rang. A family friend called me to tell me that my dad was dead, but she didn't have any other details. I was totally shocked. I had no idea what was going on, and I was in instant denial because we just made plans. I had a million things running through my head, like car accident, heart attack, etc. A few moments later, my dad's two brothers and my grandmother knocked on my door. It was true. However, the biggest shock was that Sherry was also dead. It was believed that one took the life of the other and then took their own life. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. To add insult to injury, Billy was the person who found their bodies at Sherry's house and was currently being interviewed by police. I took a call from one of the investigators on the scene. He mentioned that it was a cut and dry case. 2 adults deceased, each with a gunshot wound to the head. My dad was still clutching the gun. My dad was a hunter, so I was curious about the crime weapon. To my surprise, it was a small gauge handgun. But it wasn't my dad's, it was Sherry's. Odd, but okay. During this call, the officer told me that my dad and Sherry had consensual intercourse prior to their deaths. He also added that there was a bigger gap in time. He assumed that my dad had taken Sherry's life, had instant regret, paced, considered his options, and ultimately decided to off himself. As I'm listening to this, I just cannot wrap my mind around any of it, because it was just so out of character for my dad. And not in a "I don't believe my dad could have ever done this" kind of way, like a real sincere confusion. First of all, he wasn't even that sad about the affair. They had already been split up for 3 months at this point, and he was seemingly pretty happy in the wake of it all. Secondly, as I mentioned before, Sherry was living in a new house. My dad didn't know about her house at all, so why or how would he end up with her gun in her house? He had his own weapons. Thirdly, I knew that she had called him that morning and he ignored her call. It doesn't feel like someone that is desperate enough to take someone else's life would pass up an opportunity for an interaction with that person. None of it made sense. Still, I had to come to terms with the information I was given and trust that the police department knew what they were doing. Not to mention, I had a funeral to plan and some deep grieving to do. A few days later, I made the trip over to my dad's house to collect his belongings and settle his affairs. His house was shockingly fully on. Like lights on, TV on, cat not fed, morning coffee and weed still on the coffee table, back door unlocked, etc. It was like he raced out the door really quick with full intentions of being right back. This wasn't the home of someone who left with the intention of never returning. I know that certain circumstances can and will do strange things to people, but it's very odd. He would have never let his cat go hungry. Yet another red flag in my mind, but I just continued. Eventually, I was given some of his belongings from the scene of the crime by police, and my boyfriend decided to go through his phone to see if there were any signs of what might have occurred. We found that after I spoke to him, he did end up answering a call from Sherry, which was around 11 seconds long. But we also found a slew of really weird text messages. None of the texts appeared to have been from my dad because 1, he had terrible grammar, and 2, he didn't even know how to text. I never received a text from my dad in my entire life. He had a flip phone with T9 in 2015, for God's sake. So many people reached out to me saying this doesn't feel right, and I agreed. I didn't feel like any of it felt right, but I had nothing of any real substance other than gut instinct to guide me, which isn't enough when dealing with police or investigators. At one point, I literally had to ask people to just stop telling me that they thought this was somehow a setup because I couldn't do anything about it and I was starting to lose sleep over it. I was scared to death of turning into one of those people who obsess over something out of sheer denial. No one was going to take my plight seriously, and I already knew that I'd be overlooked and disregarded. So for the last 5 years, I have done nothing but stress and silence. Until now. This past Friday, I took a call from someone very close to my dad's friend group urging me to push harder into reopening my dad's case. Recently, it has come to light that Billy is apparently a master con artist and a fraud. I guess Sherry is one of 3 girlfriends that Billy has found dead since 2010. Okay, with this final paragraph, things really start to get interesting. Like I said, it would take far too long to go through everything, so I will only include the most important info of the updates. After she shared the entire backstory, she added more info. Prior to Billy dating Sherry, he was dating another girl who had money. She was found dead shortly after. When Billy started dating Sherry, she inherited anywhere between $500,000 to $800,000 from her father. His current girlfriend has had organ failure since last year. She inherited a larger sum of money and was just found dead last week. She also adds that Billy allegedly has multiple images of her dad's and Sherry's body, but the motive is unclear. OP then describes the entire scenario of the crime day and says that there were multiple instances where Billy could have lured her dad into Sherry's home to end his life. The issue is that the police don't really see the case as mysterious, so the case was quickly closed. So after sharing all of this, people in the comments pointed out that it makes no sense to take all of these lies if it really was for financial reasons, since he didn't actually marry any of these women. Unless they voluntarily gave him all of their money, there is no real way of legally taking the money. In an update she made, she says that she requested the FOIA file to her dad's case, but it resulted in basically no additional information. She then mailed the deputy police chief, who actually wanted to hear what she says, but she then goes on to say that she declined to actually talk to him because she was quote-unquote unprepped and that she needed more time to collect information. In a different update, she very elaborately details her conversation with Billy's ex-wife Linda, who is basically clinging to life as she is very sick. In her conversation, she agrees with OP that Billy most likely took the life of one of his girlfriends, and that Linda even went to the police, but the investigator allegedly shrugged it off, saying that the shortcomings of his investigation would come to light if he'd agree with her, thus decided to not reopen the case. This officer was the same person that offered to call OP, which OP has declined. Her third update oddly had no real noteworthy info. It was her basically saying that she messed up the FOIA request and is letting a professional handle it. In her last update, however, she finally meets the lead investigator in her dad's case, and unsurprisingly, he doesn't believe her. He clarified a few things that OP allegedly got wrong, such as the passing of one of Billy's girlfriends, which was an accident caused by herself and not by Billy. Unfortunately, that was the last update, which was around 6 months ago. The last comment she wrote was from 3 months ago, where she says she'll take a break. Obviously, I left out quite a bit, but she also states that there's no ongoing investigation and seemingly no one cares about this case, which is quite sad. I honestly don't know what to make of it. Sure, there are quite a few things which seem very suspicious, but at the same time there is no concrete evidence of anything. The police are either very incompetent and/or corrupt, or there really is nothing more to it. I'd love to hear some more thoughts from you guys. What do you think about this case? Let me know down below. This is a short post and was posted a few days ago by Macleod. It reads, "I almost got abducted and a strange noise saved my life. This happened a few years ago around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick walk. As we walked back home, we went down this one street that we use all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street, then back into our neighborhood. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music on my phone. I turned it off and turned to look for the dog because I love dogs, and I wasn't aware there was a big dog on the street. Just for context, I know quite a few people on the street, and I know which houses have dogs. Most of the people on the block have small dogs or cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big dog. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just a feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought we were being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me there were 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh?" He continued asking questions. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he'd be able to get us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on that side. We looked across the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we'd had been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog. She asked me what dog. I asked her how she didn't hear this massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what exactly it was that I heard, but I do know it most likely saved my life. That's it with this episode. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, click here and check out the full playlist. Take care and goodbye.